Hi, Auburn. I feel like I should say Merry Christmas with this weather outside today on this Wednesday, but instead I'll talk about faithfulness as I was asked to. And when I think about faithfulness, to be honest, I always think about God. But for a lot of you, possibly, God is not your first reaction to that word. And I thought I would share some thoughts that maybe weren't about God in relation to faithfulness, and then see how it compares to our faithfulness in God. So I grew up in Auburn. My name is Becky, by the way, and I grew up in Auburn, and there were some really faithful places. So maybe you're from Auburn, maybe you're not. I understand that feeling. We were overseas for 11 years, and a lot of times when people talked about their hometowns and being from a certain place, I felt left out. So I don't want you to feel left out. I want you to hang with me as I talk about Auburn and then compare it to some faithful places that you know, and then we'll transition to our faithful God. So Auburn for me was, I lived by the Finger Lakes Mall, and before it was built in the 80s, it was just a big field, and it was a great place to run around. So I would take my bike and go on down there from my Beech Tree Road where I lived, and I knew exactly how long it took to get back home. Even though I knew I wasn't far from home, it felt like I was far from home. I was going down the street and going to the big field, and there was a creek down there, and some of you might know it, and there was railroad tracks, and those were the old faithful places for me that I knew would always be there when I went. I knew it took me 13 minutes to get home on my bike, but I also knew that while I was there, it was my time. I was alone. I was with the creek. The creek was always there. It was faithful. The big field was there until one day they started plowing it up and making big holes to make the mall. And the train track even was a faithful place for me. I knew when the trains would come. I knew when it was safe to be on the tracks. I would walk the track, but I knew when not to walk the track. And so it was really a safe place. Another fun place for me that seemed faithful was Riva Roller Dome. And I know you're going to laugh at me, but I loved that place. And I only went once a month. I only went on Christian skate night. And the other nights, I didn't go, the other Friday nights. I went the one time a month that it was the Christian skate night. And for you, it might not be a safe place. Maybe you weren't asked for the couples skate, or maybe you weren't feeling comfortable there. There could be a lot of reasons that wasn't a fun place for you. But for me, Riva was fun. There was also some other fun places in Auburn that really brought security, and you knew we're just going to be open, unlike now, and we're just going to be there. Friendlies. Reese's ice cream. Yes, you could go there. You knew you were going to get an ice cream cone every time you went there. And those were the old faithful places that just made you feel like you could count on it. As we transition to faithfulness about God, it's interesting that right now, some of the faithful places that we might think about are not so faithful. Marshall's. Does anyone miss going to Marshall's? I didn't go there a lot, but my 10-minute little walk through there as I had 10 minutes between things was always a really fun time for me, just to be in there and look around at what was there. How about the grocery store? It's not so faithful on the shelves anymore when things are gone, right? Sure, I really respect the workers, and they are doing a great job at keeping things stocked for us. We're certainly not going hungry. But there are some things that just aren't there that used to be there. And this can make us feel a bit like things aren't that faithful right now. But I want to talk to you about a faithfulness that is much more substantial than these small faithful places that I'm talking about. When I talk about faithfulness, I'm talking about the faithfulness of God in my life. And I can tell you about Riva and tell you about the train tracks behind the mall, but unless you've experienced it, it really doesn't mean anything to you. It's probably kind of like to you, well, that was good for Becky, but I never experienced that. And I really understand that concept, because a lot of times we need to experience it ourselves before we can say that it's faithful. And a lot of these videos that we've been posting here on the Hope is Alive site have talked about people's personal experiences. But today, instead of telling you about a time that God was faithful to me, because he has been, and I could tell you about a lot of them, I want to talk to you more about what it would look like for you to actually know that God was faithful in your life. Because until you've experienced it, it's really hard to grasp a hold of a faithfulness of somebody that you can't see visually. You can't go and experience, like going to the mall or going to the train tracks. It's faithfulness by faith, because faith is not seeing it, but believing it. And we can see God in our lives a lot of times. Totally. I can testify to you right now that God has been in my life and that I have seen him in a sense. But until you've experienced it, it might be hard for you to see why you need God in your life. One of the verses that has really been faithful to me and that might help you see through these times because of what is happening is in 1 Corinthians. And in 1 Corinthians 10:13, it talks about temptations. And last night I saw on Cuyahoga County health site that there's four more people who have taken their lives since the beginning of this crisis. So that's a month. 4 more overdoses from drugs and alcohol. And it makes my heart hurt that they didn't know the faithfulness of God, and they didn't know that a temptation that was taking over them could be filled with God. Because 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man, which is so interesting because we can think that this crisis is something so new for us and so different. But God told us in his word, the Bible, a long time ago, that no temptation that we have is not common. He knew about it. He knew today. He knew last month when everything shut down. He knew about the virus. It's not that he planned it that way. We know that sin in the world has caused a lot of the hurt and the pain. But God does know. He is in control. So in this verse he wrote, no temptation has seized you, and he's talking to us, that is not common to man or woman. But when you are tempted, he provides a way for you to come out of, or in other words, the words he uses is to stand up under the temptation. And in that verse, he actually says, God is faithful. He says, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man, but God is faithful. And he will provide a way when you are tempted that you can come underneath it and you can stand under it. And this is so powerful right now in my life because I want to know that I have power over the temptation. Sure, do I have these temptations? Maybe not that would take my life as these people that I'm hearing about that have fallen back into temptations and back into patterns of life that they rely on something except for God. But I do have them. I have them in smaller ways, and I have them in ways that are just as powerful in my life that I need to say no to, even if they're not taking my life. But I feel as though our world has come away from the idea that God exists and that he is enough to stand up under those temptations, those fears. Some of us, our addiction and our temptation right now could just be the fear. The fear could overtake us. And I admit that I myself have been more fearful than ever in my life about things. And I've been in some pretty fearful places. But this is God's promise to us, that he promises that he will be faithful in the midst of the temptation and in the midst of where we want to go with our mind and with our body. Remember, our battle is in our mind. Remember, if you don't know God, it's not about church and it's not about attending a church or being a Christian. It is about having a relationship with Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for your sins and wants now to be able to live life with you. So it isn't just a physical presence of going to church, it's emotional and it is spiritual. It is taking his spirit within us. When we become a Christian, we join in with God's spirit. He comes and dwells within us. And that is a beautiful sight, because then when we're going through those temptations, we don't have to do them alone. He's a part of them. And he's right there with us. And he's with you now. If you never really knew what faithfulness in God is, and you questioned even God and if he existed, I want to tell you that he's real. I want to tell you that if you just take a moment today and you invite him, say, God, I want you in my life. I want to be a part of this. I believe that you exist and that you can live life with me. That's a relationship. That's being a Christian. And being forgiven for your sin, knowing that he died on the cross for you, which you'll learn once you read the Bible and you grow. You will learn that he died for your sins and that you can live forever in heaven with him again, even if we did die. But the main part of it is his faithfulness, and it is that he is there in the midst of our temptation, and he wants a relationship with you. You don't have to go through this alone. So if you're questioning what people mean when they say God's faithfulness, and you've never experienced it, just like never going to the train tracks that I've been to, and never going to Riva as a kid, or even Reese's, you might say, Becky, I don't even know where Reese's ice cream is. You know what? It's time to experience God, because you're missing out. And if you want God in your life, there are so many resources attached to this website, Hope is Alive, as well as me personally and many of the people who have spoken so far during these videos. There are sites and places and connections that we can help you with. So please reach out. Please reach out. We want you to know that we are here for you and that life has meaning when you have the faithfulness of God. So please let us know in any way, a text, write a comment on the site, and we will find you the connection that you need to know about the faithfulness of God. You don't have to just hear it from someone else. We want to introduce you to the God of the universe who tells us that he is faithful in our lives because he loves us and he loves you and he wants you to know him. So thanks for listening and enjoy the snow.